Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on certification. Now in this lesson, there's two main things that I'm going to do with you. Number one, I'm going to go through all of the Network Plus objectives as they're listed by CompTIA. And I'll also show you where you can find those objectives on your own because they do change over time. The second thing I'm going to do with you is I'm going to go through some test preparation strategies and test taking strategies that I've personally used over the years and have had a lot of success with. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I'd like to do with you when it comes to getting ready for certification is make sure that you are familiar with the exam domain objectives. Okay, and these objectives that you see in front of you are literally copy pasted straight from CompTIA's website. Okay, so as of today, when I'm making this is exactly how they have it listed. Now, I will mention that they do update and tweak these objectives occasionally. Okay, but first of all, it's very rare occasion, and second of all, it's not like a complete major overhaul. There just may be some small oversight that they may have had that they'll throw in, or something that doesn't make sense and they'll take out. But I do encourage you to go to CompTIA.org and look these up for yourself before you go and take the exam. But another thing that I want you to notice is that everything that you're going to see here, you should be able to find a lesson that covers this in the course. And the reason why is because I knew when creating this course that there's a good chance that you were going to want to take the test and you were going to want to get certified. So I wanted to make sure that we covered all of these objectives. So what do we have here? Well, first of all, the number one top broad domain objective, and I will tell you there's 5 of these, okay, 5 main areas. This first area is called networking concepts. And this is where they talk about things like the OSI and TCP/IP models, and then when it comes to those models, the different layers. We have IP addressing, routing, switching, specific ports. You may recall as far as TCP and UDP, where we talked about the difference between them. We have networking protocols, DNS, troubleshooting, and I will tell you right here when it comes to troubleshooting, here we're talking about troubleshooting methodology. You may remember that in troubleshooting, I kind of emphasize that the methodology, in my opinion, I think is the most important part in the real world when it comes to troubleshooting, and I'm glad to see that CompTIA includes this methodology in their objectives. And then we have our virtual networking components. Moving along to the second domain objective, we have network installation and configuration. So again, we're talking about the specifics of routers and switches, wireless networks, DHCP. Here we got a couple of troubleshooting. We got troubleshooting wireless, router, and switch problems. Again, if I make reference to the troubleshooting lesson, I talked about the methodology being so important, but then I went through some specific common problems. Well, this is where I pulled them from, the ones that they have listed in these objectives. And by the way, I will also mention that another reason to go to CompTIA.org and to download these objectives directly is because they have sub-points even inside these sub-domains that I have listed here. And then the last thing is talking about being able to set up a SOHO network, which is something that we talked about in a lesson near the end of the course, where you go from here. And I think regardless of it being an exam objective, I think it's also important that you set up a network just for the sake of learning it. Okay, so again, love the fact that these objectives are coordinating with what you should be doing to be successful in real life. Moving on to the third main domain objective, we have network media and topologies. Okay, so we talked very specifically about media, both cabled and wireless. We talked about, in more detail, some of the wireless standards. We talked about WAN technologies, different topologies, the different networking topologies. Again, here we have troubleshooting. So we have troubleshooting physical connectivity problems. We looked at some of the different LAN technologies, and we also had a small little bit on wiring distribution. Moving along into the fourth area, we have network management. Okay, so we look at different network appliances, hardware tools, software tools. Okay, so we have both hardware and software tools. Network monitoring, configuration management, documentation. Okay, I think that's a huge one. I know they just have it, it's like 4.5, so it gives this impression like it's not important, and documentation is huge. And then performance optimization. And then to wrap things up, the fifth main area is all about security. Okay, and we had a number of lessons on security. And here they have listed wireless security, network access security, user authentication, threats, vulnerabilities, mitigation techniques, setting up a firewall, and then the different security appliances and methods. So again, I just want to point out that for every single bullet point that I've had on each of these last few slides, you will find an area of the course that specifically relates to this. So if you feel that you're struggling with any one of these, you need to go find the area of the course that I covered that material and go back and review it again. Now, this next section of this lesson, I will tell you, may be information that seems obvious to you or you've heard before. And quite frankly, it's very common practice stuff. But at the same time, it's something that I know I like to have told to me every time before I go take an exam. And I've had many students, peers, all sorts of people who have come to me and said, hey, can you remind me of all these things that I should have on my mind as far as how to study and how to get ready for a certification exam? So I'm going to take just a few minutes here to go over these with you. Now, when it comes to study recommendations, first of all, review all the lessons. And really, if anything, I want to emphasize the word all the lessons. I know I said the word and then I did a whole sentence, but all. All is that one word I want to emphasize. When watching this course, if you are looking for certification, I strongly recommend that you go through every lesson, even if it's a topic that you think you're already familiar with. I know that's how I do it. And the reason is because there may be some small detail or some way that I present something that maybe is different than the way you've thought of it before or you've learned it before. And if nothing else, just like I mentioned how this area of this particular lesson is going to be common sense stuff and redundant to stuff you may have heard before, it's always good to hear it again. So I strongly recommend that you don't overlook anything. You go through all of the lessons. You can also use the Transcender practice tests that are included with this course as additional study material. And I will tell you that I have a lesson specifically on how to use Transcender, or really any practice test, to study for an exam. And I really recommend, if you want to take and pass this test, that you watch that lesson. And the reason why is because in that lesson, I don't go through specific subject matter. I go through a process of how to use the practice test to study and pass the test. And it's basically the way I've used them since the first day I got into this, and I've had a lot of success with it. Now, beyond that, I will tell you, the absolute number one study recommendation, above and beyond everything else, is practice, practice, practice. And when you think you've practiced enough, practice a little more. Okay, so anywhere and everywhere possible, set up a network and play with this stuff. Don't just listen to me talk about it. The more you can touch stuff, the more you can do stuff, the better off you're going to be taking the test. Now, when you think that you're just about there, all right, when you think, okay, I've watched the whole course, I've studied up on this, I'm taking the practice test, I'm feeling really good, schedule your exam. Schedule it for 1 or 2 weeks out. And again, this is not when you're completely ready. When you think you're getting real close, schedule it a week or two out. And the reason why it's so important to schedule it, because a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll say, well, I'm going to wait till I'm completely ready, and I'll just schedule it for the next day. No, schedule it out into the future so that you have a date on the calendar, and it's kind of like a goal that you're setting up for yourself. You want to set that goal and say, I am going to be ready by that date. No matter what, just do it. Because what ends up happening when you think, well, I'm just going to schedule it once I'm completely ready, you will find that you will either A, never be ready, or B, you'll end up taking this test very well likely months later on than you originally would have taken it. Okay, because you procrastinate and you make excuses and you say, I'm nervous, I'm not quite ready yet. Just schedule it out there, make a goal for yourself and say, I'm going to be ready. And that's all there is to it. Once you've scheduled it, obviously continue to study, continue using the TransCenter practice tests. Oh, and by the way, I also have up on the screen for you the website where you take the test, which is at a VUE Test Center, and you can get there with VUE.com. I've actually been told that the website also sometimes known as PearsonVUE.com, but both links work. I checked them out. Now, it's the night before the test. All right, you've scheduled it out. It's now the night before. By this point, you should be ready. You should not be at a point that you feel like you have to stay up all night and cram for this test. Now, that said, some people, that's the only way they can pass the test, is by cramming all night long the night before. If that's you, go ahead and do it. But for the most part, and this is the stuff where you've probably heard this from other teachers before in the past, what should you be doing? You should already be prepared, so if anything, you're doing a light review of the material. You shouldn't be cramming, just kind of lightly reviewing some stuff. Now, because it's a proven fact that the brain functions better when it's well nourished, eat a good meal. I can also tell you that the brain functions better when it is relaxed, when you're not stressed out. So go do something fun. Now, be careful with this fun. You know, some people think go do something fun means, go out drinking at the local bar or go out dancing at the club or whatever until 4 in the morning. Yeah, that's maybe not a good idea. But I'm sure you can find something fun that's not necessarily going to hinder your ability to pass the test the next day. And you'll notice that, the reason I say don't go out drinking until 4 a.m. is because it also says go to bed early. And the reason you want to go to bed early is because, again, it's a proven fact that the brain functions better when it is well rested. Okay, so that's the whole idea here is, make yourself not stressed and allow yourself to be well nourished and well rested. And I could even add one to this. I mean, it's not really a bullet point that's needed here, but make sure you're hydrated. That's another one. But really, you can take care of that one the day of the exam. And speaking of the day of the exam, again, try to stay relaxed. Don't freak yourself out. It's just a test. And I know that might, you might be sitting there saying, well, it's easy for you to say, my job depends on this, or this job I'm trying to get depends on this, or a promotion depends on this, or a raise depends on this, or, maybe it's just a factor of, I don't have the money to pay to take it a second time if I fail. I get it. I mean, trust me, I get it. But at the same time, the more you stress over this exam, the more you're hurting your chances at passing the test. Okay, so just relax and tell yourself it's just a test. Worst case scenario, you fail, you're going to have to come up with a couple bucks to go back and take it again. That's it. So stay relaxed. I recommend having a light meal before you go to the test center, and you'll notice I've emphasized the word light. Don't pig out, and you probably should eat healthy if possible so that you don't want to be in an uncomfortable situation while taking the test. So eat a light meal, eat a healthy meal. And again, as I mentioned just a little while ago, probably make sure that you drink some water, get yourself hydrated and everything. And again, you're just trying to make your brain function as good as it possibly can. And you should also plan on arriving to the test center 30 to 45 minutes early. Now, when you register, I believe they will tell you to plan on arriving 15 minutes early. They might even say 15 to 30. I'm not sure. The reason I'm saying 30 to 45 is because, again, I'm trying to avoid stress. Depending on how you're getting there, if you're driving to the test center, what if there's an accident out on the road and you're held up, right? What if there's traffic? Even if you're taking public transportation, things happen. I don't want you to stress out when you're suddenly held up. If you plan on getting there early, you can get held up and still be relaxed and say, no big deal, I'm glad I planned early. If you get there super early and you're thinking, well, that's great, you told me to come early and nothing went wrong, so now I'm just bored, maybe bring, just something to read, or, especially even like with the TransCenter, I believe you can print out some flashcards. Print those out. Just kind of review them. while you're sitting there waiting to take the test. Now, when you get to the test center itself, you want to bring the two forms of identification, and this is all laid out for you on Vue's website, but you want to have these two forms of identification that you're going to be required to have in order to take the test. But as far as I'm concerned, leave everything else, either in the car if you drove, or at home if you're taking public transportation. Okay, and some examples would be your cell phone, calculator, study notes. Now, I know that might conflict with something I just said a minute ago because I said study notes. You might want to bring your TransCenter flashcards or whatever, but I'm not as worried about that one because basically what's going to happen is the test administrator is going to take them from you. But that's okay. The reason I say leave everything else in the car or at home is because they're pretty much going to take everything from you. Depending on the test center you go to, some are more strict than others. Some practically strip search you. Okay, I mean, they want to make sure you're going in with nothing so you can't cheat. So when I go, I will tell you I have the two forms of identification in my pocket, and usually I drive, so I'll have my car keys, and that's it. I leave my cell phone in the car because that way I feel my cell phone is safer in the car than with the test administrator holding it for me. That way I don't have to think about, is my phone safe, this and that. Same thing with even like my wallet, anything else of value. Just don't bring it in with me. And that way I don't have to stress about it. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, if you do have spare time, then do either a light review if you have flashcards, or just, find something to occupy your brain. Some people I've seen doze off and take a nap while they're waiting for their test. I can't speak for everybody, but for me personally, that would be a bad thing. My brain, when I doze off, the whole brain kind of shuts down, and it's like a freight train. It takes a while to get working again. So I usually like to do something, maybe if I sit in my car and play a game on my cell phone or something like that, if I have to, just to keep my brain functioning. All right, so now you're actually in taking the test. What should you do? Well, first of all, read each question carefully. And not only will I say read it carefully, but read it entirely. Sometimes you will come across some longer questions. With CompTIA, usually this is not so much the case, but with other vendors it is. But if it is a longer question, a lot of people tend to kind of skip through it, maybe get to the last sentence because they'll think, well, that's the real question. No, you might be losing some context to the questions if you don't read the whole thing. Before you choose an answer, you should read all of them. I know a lot of people who will read a question, they will see choice A, and they will say, well, that makes sense, and they pick that as an answer, not realizing that choice B, C, or D may have been a better answer. So look at all your answers. Then from there, this is just a common sense process. Eliminate any obvious wrong answers. Okay, I mean, if you look at a question and you're stressing about the question, but maybe you know a little bit about the topic, well, if there's 4 choices and you're guessing, you only have a 25% chance of getting it right. If you look at those answers and see that 2 of them are just obviously wrong and they're just way off base, and now you're only guessing from the 2 remaining choices, well, now you have a 50-50 chance. All right, so that's how you want to answer the questions. Make sure you answer all of the questions. If you don't know the answer to a question, then guess. Okay? You're not penalized for guessing. And what I mean by that is if you skip a question and don't answer it, it's wrong. If you answer it and you selected the wrong answer, well, then it's still wrong. All right? So, I mean, wrong is wrong. There's not one that's more wrong than the other. Not answering or answering the wrong, selection, it's still wrong. So guess if you have to. Now, speaking of guessing on the questions that you don't know, one real common practice on these exams is to go through once and answer the questions you do know and mark the questions that you don't know. There's usually a checkbox saying mark for review. Or if you don't want to mark it for review, just skip it, and then when you get to the end, it'll show you what questions you have not answered. The reason I want you to do this is because if you just go through the test, one question after the other, you may come across a series of questions along the way that you're really struggling with, and you spend a lot of brain power and a lot of time trying to think of an answer. And then what happens is you look up at the clock and you realize, wow, I've got 1 minute left before this timed exam is over, and I've got 5 questions left. Well, I don't have time to read them all, so I guess I'm just going to guess on these last 5 questions because, better to guess than not answer them, right? The problem is those last 5 might have been the easiest 5 questions on the whole test, and now you guessed on those when you could have had those right. So go through the ones you know, get those answered solid, then go back and start doing your rethinking or your guessing. And speaking of rethinking, by the way, another recommendation that I have, and I don't have it listed here, but I will tell you, is typically once you've answered a question, don't go back and change it. Unless you have some driving, motivating factor, like maybe you'll answer a question that you thought you were certain about, but then you'll see another question later on the exam, which gives you some information that tells you, oh, no, wait a minute, I answered that other one wrong. That happens all the time. If that happens, then sure, go back and change the other one. But if it's a matter of you, maybe looking at a question and you're going, well, I'm kind of narrowing it down to a 50-50 guess, and my gut's telling me it's B is the right answer out of these 2 choices that I think are right, so I'm going to answer B. And then you decide when you're all done with the exam, you got half an hour left before the timer's up, and I'm going to go back and review all my answers. That is one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen people make. I am a certified VUE test administrator, meaning it's been a number of years since I've done it, but years ago, I used to actually be able to sit in the room while people took their exam. And I've watched people go through and take a test and get almost every question right, but then have all this time left over and go back and start rethinking. And what happens is you overthink these questions and you talk yourself out of the right answer. So my opinion is once you've answered it, leave it alone. I mean, skip it if you truly don't know it and you want to guess later. But once you've made that guess, move on. Don't come back unless there's something that's telling you should. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of this entire lesson. Okay? What you're looking at right here is the most important thing if you want to pass the test. I've talked a whole lot about staying relaxed. Well, I'm going to take it a step further and I'm going to say, look, don't panic. I've watched people have panic attacks. Don't do that. Just don't panic no matter what's happening. It's okay if you're not sure of the answer to some of the questions. It happens all the time. It happens to me on I can't remember a certification exam that I've taken that there wasn't at least one question that I looked at and said, where the heck did they pull that question from? That was not in any book I read. That was not in any course I took. It was not on any of the practice tests. Where did this come from? It happens all the time. That's okay. And there's a couple things that I'm going to tell you about this. First of all, regardless of your score, that's another thing that I really want to point out to you, is don't get bent out of shape over your score. If you pass, you pass. It doesn't matter if you got literally the passing score. If it tells you you need a certain number, and by the way, I'm being real vague here because the number doesn't always stay the same. But if they tell you you need a 750 to pass and you get exactly a 750, great. And the saying that I used to tell all my students is, I used to ask them a question. I'd say, well, what do you call a medical student who graduates last in their class? You still call them doctor. Okay, they're still a doctor. And if you pass the Network Plus exam, as long as you get the score that's required, it doesn't matter if maybe someone else got a higher score. The bottom line is you passed. You are Network Plus certified. And I will tell you that even as an instructor who has been teaching Network Plus for about 14 years at this point when I'm making this, I have never once by any employer been asked, what score did you get on your exam? Not once. All they want to know is that I've passed the exam. And the other thing that I want to tell you when it comes to not knowing the answer to some of the questions, you don't need a perfect score. Meaning CompTIA acknowledges the fact that It's just unrealistic to think that somebody's going to know the answer to everything. They expect that you're not going to know the answer to everything. They just want to know that you know enough information that they can feel confident that they can certify you to go out there and be a network administrator. All right, so that's why I really, really, kind of am emphasizing this point here. Don't panic. Just get in there. Don't start freaking out when you see a question. I've seen people go in and, after 5 questions into the test, they didn't know any of the 5 questions and they were freaking out. But then it turned out they knew every other question after those first 5. Sometimes that's what they'll do. They'll throw the hardest ones at you right out the gates just to freak you out. Don't let it happen. And so that does bring us to the end of this lesson, where hopefully there's been at least a few tips and tricks that you found useful while getting ready for your Network Plus exam. And with that, I wish you all the best luck in the world. Of course, you're not going to need it because you're just going to know everything on the exam anyway, right? And anyway, I'll see you in the next lesson.